Hello and welcome to the GMS Magazine podcast. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is a podcast all about role-playing games, board games, and the people who make them, sometimes the people who play them. And this is the RPG Interview Room, the show in which I am lucky enough to get together with some of the best people in the world of role-playing games and ask them a ton of questions. Today I have with me Garry Snow from Dieku Games. Garry has created one of the most visually stunning and cute and beautiful OSR games I have seen. Seriously, this is inspired idea, and I really love how it plays. I love what it looks like with its IKEA figures. Yeah, IKEA figures, they're delightful. And I wanted to ask him a lot of questions. He also has a Dieku podcast, which I thoroughly recommend because he makes some absolutely fantastic interviews. And I wanted to ask about, everything. What's going to be the future of FÄNGELSEHÅLA? FÄNG is a Swedish name, and I cannot for the life of me bring myself to butcher the name. So I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to leave you here, and I am going to introduce Garry, and hope that you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, which quite frankly was a lot. If you want to be part of this podcast, please let me know. I would love to have you around and have a talk about your project, your game, your Kickstarter, whatever it is that you want to talk about. Write to me on podcast@gmsmagazine.com. And please subscribe and leave a comment. It helps a lot to get found. Whether you listen to it in Facebook or in Spotify or YouTube, please just leave a comment. Leave us a 5-star review. That helps a lot, and it is genuinely appreciated. Now with you, here is Garry and Dieku Games. Garry, welcome to the show. For transparency, human listening to this thing, listeners, this is the second time that we do this because OBS messed up and I didn't realize. So this is the second time that I welcome Garry to the show. So Garry, you must be used to it by now.
Yeah, I think we nailed that first one. Hopefully we can get the second one going well, but thank you for having me. I've said previously, a big fan of the podcast. I've been listening for many years now.
And I've listened to you as well. Again, people, if you hear me speak funny, today is for two reasons. One, I have a cold and I really cannot get my nose to unblock. And secondly, because I may geek out because I do tend to be a bit overwhelmed when I'm in the presence of podcasters that I think are better than me. So there, I said it. But
well, I appreciate the kind words, but I think it's the other way around. But good, continue.
Well, we can be in awe of each other for a bit. That's fine. I think that's totally allowed. It's totally cool. Okay, so you are coming out with a game. We're going to talk at length about the game because I am very curious about an awful lot of things, and what I have been able to see from the PDF that you sent me. I'm loving it. Really, I am genuinely loving it for many reasons. But tell me a little bit about you first. What is your background as a gamer? Because I presume that was there before you started doing documentaries and podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, if you go way back, my story is probably very typical of like many people my age. I'm just cracking 50, and I grew up and my family bought me the basic red box set in like a drugstore in my small little town in the mountains of British Columbia here in Canada. And I just like soaked it up. It was kind of a random purchase and I loved it. And I kind of included my friends into the hobby, and I kept getting them more and more interested. And then we went from the basic to the expert. And then all of a sudden this advanced version came out and we were like, well, we don't want to be kids and play the basic version, so we're going to play advanced. And it just kept growing over there. But the one oddity, maybe for me compared to a lot of my friends, is they were very happy to just play D&D. And for me, I just scoured for other role-playing games. And at that time, it was very difficult that we didn't have the internet at the time. It was very difficult to find different types of games. But I always, in my head, I was like always thinking like, I'd love to make a game. I started making my own mechanics. Even at that time, I have like an old dot matrix printing version of my very first game, which was actually a percentile before I even kind of knew
What
that.
percentile was, yeah.
Yeah. And so anyways, I fell in love with the hobby. I fell in love with the imaginary world that you can create. And I mean, by all accounts, we didn't really know the rules. Like, we were kind of winging it. We were kind of too young. And but when I still reflect upon that, that was some of the best gaming times of my life. There's probably a bit of nostalgia baked in with that. But at the same time, like, there's something about that style of play that I've always been trying to adhere to. And so, like, we can talk about it later, but that's when I designed this game. That was the essence of what I was after. And so, fast forward, everybody turned 20, went off to university, went different directions in my friend group. And, the gaming kind of fell off a cliff. And then I did the most tragic thing ever, which is also not that uncommon, is like, after like 10 years of it sitting in a bin, all my games, all my books, I said, like, I've been dragging this around from like 2 different houses now. And that I would bring it out periodically and look at it, but I didn't have a gaming group. And so I said, I'm just going to sell it at a garage sale. And whoever bought that from me, like, made out like a bandit, because it was
They probably have
the
an
best
amazing
stuff.
treasure. Yeah, they have.
And pristine condition, best stuff. And then, I've periodically, but I've always wanted to be a game designer. I just love reading the books, and that's like a common trope of the hobby, is that people buy the books, they read the books, and that's a little bit like a solo play kind of environment. And so when you start to think about the way that you incorporate games into your lives, like even reading it, and I learned this, that even reading the book is an act of like solo gaming, and like imagining how it plays. And so I have now since built up my collection again after my kids I have 2 daughters, and I was a widower, and they were quite young, so that really kind of impacted my free time. And as soon as they kind of got old enough, and I was like, I had a little bit more free time on my hands, I said, I'm going to get back into gaming. And so that's, fast forward to my growth in like learning, probably after that long gap, better mechanics, and then starting up my podcast. And here we are, where I finally put out my very first published game.
I love that thought that when you're reading a game, it's kind of like solo gaming, because it's very difficult not to imagine the stories as you're reading the lore of whatever game you're doing it. And I find that fascinating, because there are still an awful lot of people out there who don't consider solo RPG as a form of gaming. They think it's like, some sort of gaming onanism, which I find it a bit sad that they don't realize that they've been solo gaming every time they read a game.
Yeah, it's to me, it's like the best hobby in the whole world. It allows you to grow your imagination, to gather around tables and have laughs and fun, and occasionally cry. And I think it's the best hobby in the world. I just wish more people would be playing it, because I think they're missing out.
I agree, completely agree with you. So why publishing FÄNG? I mean, one thing is to do your own game, but the publishing business, it's a lot of work, and you have done not just the writing but also the illustrations for the game. What made you decide to take the leap and go for it?
Well, I'm sure, as many game designers can attest to, like, sometimes things go on weird trajectories, and this one is one of those cases where I thought, okay, I'm going to design a game, and I called it the Dieku system. And the reason I called it the Dieku system, because I really loved as many people do, like the Honey Heist. And I was like, how can you boil down a game so it's like so simple that anybody can play it? And in my head, I think I was going to call it the Dieku system, and I had this mechanic, and then I just want like it to be so simple. And then I came up with this thing of like, well, I'll just make it like an IKEA game, like an instruction manual. So it's so simple. And the reason I chose the name Dieku is like a haiku is very simple and elegant, and like, so, and then, the die of being rolling a die. So anyway, so that's kind of how the name came about, is just like elegant, simple design and with dice. And so anyways, I made the game. I put it out there, and I called it Dungeon at that time, just like with Swedish phonetics and stuff like that, and playing off the IKEA theme. And it was okay, I guess. Like it was okay. And then, 3 years later, I was like, it wasn't that good. I've learned a lot of like game design theory in the last 3 years. And then I'll side quest here.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to make a second game called Bug Busters. You can see my shirt here if anybody's watching that. And I started to develop some mechanics, and but I really liked the mechanics, but the game I knew wasn't ready. And then Zine Quest came up, and I was like, why don't I just like put out my IKEA stuff, but with the new rules from Bug Busters, as like just slide those rules into, because I was really enjoying the rules I was creating for Bug Busters, and I'll just throw it into this game and put it out on Zine Quest, and didn't think much of it really. I was just like, I've got a lot of the IKEA art done, and I thought I'll just slide it in, swap it in, and that kind of thing. And so I put it out on Zine Quest, and it kind of caught fire a little bit. People were taken with the design of the little IKEA figures, and like kind of that folk children art, like as I call it, 1960s, like mid-century modern illustrations. And it caught fire, and all of a sudden I had a bunch of backers, and then I was like, oh, I didn't expect it to kind of be to be anywhere close to successful. I was just happy to kind of get the rules out there as like a tester almost. And so I was very grateful for that. But then I went, okay, but I don't want it to just be stick figures. And I thought about like some of the stuff that I really enjoy as far as the art goes. And I've always loved mid-century modern and like children book illustration. I mentioned my two daughters. We would go to the library and go to the children book section, and I would be poring over the children books, and they would be at the puppet show playing with puppets. And here I was like a grown adult flipping through the children books. So it gave me a good excuse to like go there. And I just love that kind of style of illustration. It just like, it brings back the memory of being a kid. So pairing it with that feeling of the game that I designed, of being, once again, kind of a youth, and the illustrations I liked. And I'm not a great artist by any stretch, but I knew I could pull off children book illustrations. Like I have that level of capacity, but I couldn't do anything more elaborate, but it worked for the game. So I paired that up, and over the since the Kickstarter backed, I like really expanded the look and the feel of it to that children book illustration, which I thought matched nicely with the IKEA stick figures. And here we are. It was a Kickstarter, and we delivered in December.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was quite happy with that. And now I'm kind of trying to get, catching my breath a little bit. But now I'm like, I'd love people to try it out and to play it.
Okay, so let's dive into it, because although it's a fairly small book at 44 pages, but there is an awful lot to unpack in there. First and foremost, tell me a bit about FÄNG. What is the theme of the game? What's the game all about?
Well, I said, it was kind of like a little bit like a rules testing ground. And so like, what better place to test than like a dungeon crawler?
Mm-hmm.
And then early on, like I had to like the base rules for Bug Busters, but what this forced me to do was to go like, okay, like those rules were like 50% done. I needed to take it to 100. And, much like a lot of other games, like in the OSR, you boil down like a mechanic and simplify it and simplify it and simplify it and reiterate and reiterate. And that's essentially what happened with FÄNG, is where one of the key features of the Bugbusters and now FÄNG is like a dice stacking mechanic, where you track your damage by dice stacking, and it's called the Doom Stack. And so I wanted to make sure that this Doom Stack was always in place. So by doing that, I incorporated more saving throws, like micro saving throws is what I would call them. And I always call it like envisioning like piranhas nipping at you. And so like when you're in the dungeon, it's like that constant ratcheting up of the stress and these like tiny little saving throws throughout the whole time that just ratchet it up, versus in a lot of games, like it's just like that big swing where like the monster hits you and now you're dead. Like this is continuously ratcheting up. And if this Doom Stack topples, then you're in trouble and you have to kind of recover from that. So that was kind of the core mechanic, but I had to kind of figure out a way to make sure that the dice were working in coordination with each other. And I always have been a big fan of the West End Games D6 system, originally done first in Ghostbusters, and then later reused for the West End Star Wars D6 game. And I found, like, over the years, if you look on forums, people always say that is the easiest game to pick up and the easiest game to learn. So that was the game that I boiled down to its essence. And one of the things that I mean, it's a great game, so I'm not knocking it, but one of the things I always found difficult was, you roll 6 dice, say, and then you have to count the pips, as they call them, on the dice. And I was like, you're exhausted by the end of a session where you're just like constantly counting dice. So my solution was to boil it down to just the top 2 results are counted, and you put it on a scale of 12, versus like the old West End games, it was like on a scale of 24 plus or whatever. And that really simplified it, because you're only looking for those top 2 dice. So, 2 6s is 12, and snake eyes. And that seemed to like really work. And then it also allowed you to incorporate that Doom Stack mechanic of the Doom dice, and that you could add a Doom dice into your roll, but then immediately goes on the stack. And then you have a luck dice that you can add after the fact. And so it all kind of was syncopatic. It just kind of ended up working. And I also have to give a lot of credit to Tom Kronhofer, who is my editor. He was a backer on Kickstarter, and I was releasing iterations of it on Kickstarter so people could like participate in it. And Tom was like by far and away the most like, he just like was so passionate about helping me make this game. And by the 3rd or 4th time that he submitted, well, what about this and what about that, which helped me clarify those rules much better. I said, Tom, do you want to be the editor? Because like
he knew the game inside out by then. Yeah,
by then he was like, and it's like a minimal game, like you said, like I had to condense everything into 44 pages. So then that was also, like it gives you those guardrails or the parameters of, you have to be very precise with your words. You don't want anything extra, like if you can boil it down to as simple as possible. So in my view, my hope was, I have boiled this game down to like its absolute core of there's probably a cooking metaphor about boiling things down to like its essence, but like that's basically what I've done, is boil the game down to its smallest little piece, but it sure packs a punch, I think.
I agree. Before we go into a few of the design decisions that you've made, which I find really, really interesting, what is the lore of the game? Because I know there's only 1 page, and I know it is very heavily influenced by Nordic mythology. What are you expecting people to do with that lore? Would you want people to expand it, to incorporate into their games? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's actually really not that much lore, other than one of the challenges. And this is like, in my view, like this is not a game. I mean, you technically could, but this is not a game that you're going to have characters probably last for like many, many sessions and like, year-long campaign. This is really designed to be like, hey, let's play, like our game crashed out, people aren't here, let's play a game. And this is one to pull out. Or if you're introducing new people, I've had a ton of people that have backed the game say like, my nephews love this, like this is the perfect game to introduce to my family. And so with that said, the lore is kind of light, but I think you need a hook. So my very first page is like, the crops have failed. The reindeer have been driven south by the wolves and like eaten what is left. There's like a demon fish in the water that's taken all the fishing stocks out, and like the kingdom is suffering. And so you are the hope of the kingdom to go in there. And if you can earn enough money, you can pay the neighboring kingdom for supplies to last you through the winter. So it immediately kind of puts you in that space of, you're not just like treasure hunting for treasure's sake. You're there to like protect your family, and your family has pooled all their resources and given it to you, that anything that they've had to make your journey and your adventure successful. So that's like right off the bat, like I wanted to have people go like, we're doing a good thing here.
I agree, because one of the things I always ask people is why do characters want to do anything in the world? What is the point of the players and the characters being there? And I think with that premise of, if you get enough money, you can get supplies to survive, that is quite a motivation to want to do things other than just go get the loot, come back and do what with it.
Yeah, that's my hope, is to like, give some meaning, especially like I said, like I think there's going to be probably lots of younger kids that are playing it, and I think they can tap into that like family, like I'm doing it for my family, much like almost every like kid show, like Goonies or Stranger Things or anything, like, the younger ones are gonna rescue you. They're not necessarily kids, but the ethos is there.
One thing I am really taken by is how you have actually mixed the graphic design and the art of the book with the mechanics. Like, for example, I have in front of me right now what happens during a round of the game, and the whole color palette, the whole arrow situation, action, outcome, situation, action, it's beautifully interwoven with how the game looks and how the game feels, whilst still being very informative and very, very clear. How do you get to that kind of philosophy of mixing both things together? Because as a graphic artist and art director, that ain't easy to do. That's not something that anyone can do. So how did you get that? What was the journey?
Well, my background is I'm actually a communications marketing professional. So I've been doing graphic design since like the early days of the 2000s. And so for me, like I've been a jack of all trades. Like I actually do video production, I do like multimedia, I do animation. Like, so I do like lots of little things. And I used to be truly like a jack of all trade, but a master of none. And then, as time goes on and you keep doing all of them, and that whole thing of like 10,000 hours and you can be an expert in everything. Well, eventually all those jacks of all trades and masters of nones become like better. And now I feel pretty confident in my skills that I can kind of incorporate all different facets to everything. And perhaps like that whole like gap in the delay of me ever getting back into role-playing games was a benefit, because I was actually developing my skills to come to this point. But I think information design is like such a tricky thing. Some of it is intuitive, some of it is experience, some of it is like just trial and error. And so I tried to take as much of the philosophy as I could and graphic-ize it so that it would be easy to digest. And a lot of the premises in the game, there's a few things that I don't think have been done before, like mechanic wise and all that kind of stuff. They're kind of fairly unique. But then there's other things that like it's just the way I play. Like so the round of what happens in a round, there's like no real action economy. Mm-hmm. It's just like, here's the situation that the Doomsayer, or the GM in my game, is the Doomsayer. The Doomsayer says, well, here's the situation, and this is what's going to happen. And now it's up to the players to intervene through their actions. So there's a gentle hand of the Doomsayer kind of always guiding the game, but the players always have ultimate control to intervene and do whatever they want, given the situation. And then based upon the roles or the decisions made by the players, it goes off to the outcomes, which is the new situation.
Action roles. You I don't think you could have made this any simpler, could you? Because this is like, I mean, you can read this page in 1 minute and understand exactly how these action rolls are going to work and how the difficulty levels are going to be applied. How long did it take you to distill that and make it that accessible? Because I see so many games that try, and when I finish reading, it's like, I'm never going to understand this. I need to read this 5 times to understand. And yet, with this, you've managed. How long did it take you to do that?
That was early on in the distillation of the D6 system. And like, I was like, well, what do you call these dice? Because I wanted to, like, if I'm going to have Doom dice, you know, what am I going to call the dice that I actually do stuff with? And so for those at home, there's white dice for action and black dice for Doom. And a third color, I use orange for luck. And so that when you combine them all, you can kind of see, you know, which has contributed to the roll or not. And when you roll it all at once. And for me, like that whole thing of like, why name something twice when you can name it once? And so I just called action dice because they're in doing actions, and same with the Doom. So you look for opportunities to consolidate and boil it down. And that was one of those ones. The mechanics were always there, and I had like, they were different names at different times and all that kind of stuff. And then you have those aha moments when you're out on a walk and you're thinking about the problem, and then you go, oh, just do that. Like, it was so simple. It was there the whole time. It was just waiting to be uncovered.
I love that. Okay, combat, jinx. I absolutely love the concept. How did you come about the jinx?
Well, I mean, like most games now, I mean, like PBTA, you want the success with a complication.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest complaints about PBTA is like, I can't come up with that many complications. Like, it's just like constantly.
Yes.
And you know, part of the reason I designed the game was to be a minimal cognitive load on the GM or the Doomsayer. Like, I want this to be fun to run. I don't want this to be like taxing on the GM. Like, your job is to just have fun and make the game go. And so when the way I approached it was that the jinx would only happen on a tie, and there's only one roll. So like, if you do your action roll to fight in combat, and there's a difficulty of the monster, and if you tie it, that's where the jinx happens. And if you're above it, you do damage, and if you're below it, you take damage. So there's only one roll. GM or the Doomsayer never has to roll. And the jinx, I did want a complication, but just on a like lesser scale of like being exhausted by complication after complication after complication, because I know that is, to me, just too much. Like, it's just like, once in a while it's nice to have. And then in my adventures, I often, like in a room, I'll say, here's some potential complications or jinxes that could take place, and it just makes it easy for the Doomsayer to look and go, oh, here's like 3 potential complications I could throw in.
Let's talk about character creation, because I think there's a fairly good understanding of how the rules are going to work, because they're really that simple. What kind of characters can people play in FÄNG?
Well, you know, the traditional ones of, you know, you got your warrior, and they all have Swedish names. So the Vate is the goblin. And I wanted it to kind of be a mix. And I know, like, you know, the people are always like, you know, I don't like races, class, and all that stuff. But for a minimal game, it kind of had kind of go that way. But I wanted to have like different races and your classes, character types, as I call them. And so you could be, the more unique ones would be a troll. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you know, not many parties, like in traditional games, have like a troll in the party or a goblin. And each one of them has their own kind of like strengths and weaknesses, or advantages and disadvantages. And goblins, I like the fact that in the mechanics, if people miss like with an arrow, there's a potential that they'll have to roll a saving throw because they might get hit. And the goblins, for instance, always never have to roll because they're just like so lucky and squirmy that they just never get hit. Like, they always like sixth sense danger, and they just never get hit by that secondary like friendly fire. And so there's trolls, but one of the ones that I personally like is the Gravlinger, which is like a badger folk type of person. And I modeled it after like the old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Yukon Cornelius character, where they're like these badger folk that just love digging for diamonds and love dungeons, and it kind of has a bit of a thief in it kind of template, but not quite. But they love like working with ropes and digging tunnels and that kind of stuff. So that was like maybe one of my more favorite ones. And then you have the wizard. But with that said, anybody can use magic, and so there's the way you cast magic is by rune stones, and the rune stones also have a secondary use. Like, once again, why do two things when you can combine them? Mm-hmm. So I called the stones, the rune stones, the weight that characters can carry. So instead of memorizing spells, you can keep casting them, but you can only carry so many rune stones with you because they're heavy.
That's super clever. I really love that. How do you create those characters? What's the character creation process?
There's only 4 attributes. So I wanted it to be as simple as possible. You've got will, which is like, personality and like determination and spells. You've got tinker, which is like more of those like mechanical things and like disarming traps and like building tunnels and stuff like that. And then you've got your typical agile and your tough. And so agile is ranged weapons and balancing, and tough is like melee weapons and like taking damage and that kind of thing. And when you start the game, each character type starts with a certain amount. Usually it's like between 2 and 4. And then I wanted the process of making the character also to educate you about how the game works. So I have them make a saving throw for each one of those attributes. And if they are successful, the attribute goes up 1, so that it's good. And if they fail it, they get a luck dice as a consolation prize. So it's not all bad. And through that process, they learned a little bit about how to play the game in making the character. Mm-hmm. And one of the other kind of philosophies is when you have 4 attributes, if you actually make people choose which to bump up, it's very difficult. I learned that in a play test with Bugbusters, is if there's 4 attributes and you go, okay, you get to boost up 2 of them, it's very difficult to go like, well, which 2? So I needed to make sure it was a little bit randomized as far as which ones go up. And so that was the process. There's a standard starting with each type. You get like a base core of equipment, and then you have some money to buy other stuff, and away you go. Like, it's that simple. Like, you can make a character in like 30 seconds.
How about leveling up? I know you mentioned that characters are not likely to last for very, very long campaigns, but what happens during that time? Can the character become better at what they do? How was the leveling up situation there?
Well, there's like games that are like OSR, minimalist OSR, where they're like, no, the whole part of the game is to get the treasure and like grow your character as is. However, with that said, there are additional options, and in Bugbusters, there's options as far as each time you get further ahead, you can get like an extra luck dice. So, each time you go up a level per se, you gain a luck dice. Or if you get an advantage, you can put that towards like any of the things like a weapon advantage, or like you're particularly good at like tightrope walking or something. Like, you get like an advantage like that. So these are not in the game as it exists now. There are plans to have like a expanded version, okay, if you want to continue like more expanded gameplay and build your character out a little bit more. So it's not that it can't be done, it's just in the original core rules it's not included, but they are going to be included in the I have a plan for a Doomsayer guide, so that will be there.
And I was going to ask you about that, because being a game that looks so friendly, I can see an awful lot of both gamer and not gamer parents giving this to kids to try, because I can imagine an 8 or 9 year old would be able to read this without too much difficulty. What kind of introduction to GMing, to doomsaying is there in FÄNG for the younger players?
I have plans, and going back to that whole thing where I'm a, jack of all trades, is I have a plan for like an animated, like quick tutorial playlist on my YouTube channel where people can basically go, just watch this for like 2 minutes and you're going to know the game. And maybe I'm overthinking it. That's maybe I have perfectionist tendencies where I'm like, no, I want it to be good. I actually have those at home, they probably can't see. So sorry for that. I was going to do like little cutouts like this and like on an overhead camera and like kind of do it like that. And I still might, but the plan is I want to support the players and the doomsayer as best as possible, where you can just bring it up on your phone and go, watch this. In 2 minutes, you're going to know how to play, and let's go.
Okay. And what about for the running of the game itself? What kind of information is there in the book for GMs that want to? Because it's an awful lot of work being a GM. How are you going to help them in the book?
In the future book, there's going to be more details about everything from like, there will be a little bit of guidance, like random tables, like, okay, like you're coming to the end of the adventure, and this might be heresy, but like, if you're only doing a one shot, here's a random table to end it, like to bring in the big bad or whatever the case might be, or how to extend it, how to have like split the parties, all those types of things. And like I love splitting the parties. I think it's for me, I think it's almost awesome when the party splits, because in the way I design FÄNG is you can like really just jump between them. Like there's no like real like action economy, right? So it's just like we're jumping here, wait for a cliffhanger, we're off to the next one. We do that. And just like, reading a game is like solo gaming. Listening to what's happening in the other party is pretty interesting. Like, and it's fun to actually see it as, like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, where you've got 3 different storylines all happening at the same time and how to sync them up at the end. So those are the types of things, like for me, is giving just tips and tricks on like how to use the rules in order to have the best game you can at the table.
What kind of foes people are going to find in FÄNG?
What kind of
foes? What kind of enemies, monsters? Was the fauna like?
I have in the game, and so with 44 pages, I started in like basically a monster manual, and I was like, I do not have enough pages for any kind of amount of monsters, and then or they would just turn into kind of tables of monsters, and I was like, I just didn't want that. And so basically on the game, like I had a random monster generator, and I broke them into different categories of like serpents, insects, enchanted. There's like dwellers, which are kind of, folk that like live in the dungeon, beasts. And so you roll the 3 different colored dice on a table, and you basically come up with like an immediate monster. And one of the key elements of the monsters are critical attacks. And one of the things about a lot of games is there's a lot of GM fiat, which I actually don't mind. I think it's an important piece of the game of how the GM makes things work. But for monsters, like it's kind of like you look at like a typical stat block, and it's like, well, they have fire breath, and they have this, and they have that, and like when did those get triggered? And I incorporated the triggering of the critical attack by the monster into the dice roll. So, if you're fighting a dragon, and like I said, if you get above the difficulty, you give damage, and if below, you take damage. And if you happen to roll 2 1s, that triggers the critical attack of the monster. So in the case of the dragon, it might have a fire attack and that would impact the whole group through the saving throws. Everybody would have to make a saving throw. So it's an additional attack above and beyond what might just normally happen of the dragon swiping at you with claw and claw. And the timing of it is, it's pretty rare not super rare, but it's rare enough that it happens on occasion. And then also too, like one of the key things, and this game is really designed to be played in real life at the table, because when you see each other's die rolls, and so if your friend is attacking a dragon and they roll 2 1s, and then now everybody's going to be exposed to the dragon fire, you go, oh, I can't believe you rolled 2 1s, and now we all suffer for it. And so that's part of like the fun of the game, is seeing each other's roles, impacting it. And part of the advanced rules, if you want to call them that, is that if two people are working together, they can combine dice.
Mm-hmm.
So that that'll be like your friend could come in and save you with a luck die or an extra action die and that kind of thing, so that you can actually achieve what you're trying to do. Or if they're like falling off a cliff, you could maybe add to that and help them. So lots of the dice are like a really key component. And I think in today's online world, it's rare that a game is like this tactile. And part of that is like I really wanted this to be a bridge for board gamers too, that are like, I've always wanted to try a role-playing game,
Mm-hmm.
but I really don't know how to do it. This game was designed to help bridge that, and it's got board game type mechanics that are incorporated into it, and it just kind of syncs up.
A question for you, considering that this is going to be hopefully played by an awful lot of very young people, how does it handle character death? What's in the book about it?
If your Doomstack topples, then you go into the condition of like you're basically dying, and you have to successfully make a saving throw against your will in order to revive. And if you revive, you get a scar that is permanent. And so when you start the game, your Doomstack is at 0. But if you were to use the character again, you have a permanent doom die to start the game. So eventually, I mean, if you go through this scenario 5 times, you're going to have 5 scars, and you're going to have 5 permanent doom dice. And at that point, you might go, hey, maybe I'm going to retire this character. I'm working out. Find a new career.
So what happens when a character actually dies? Is there any mechanisms for the player to continue in the game? Because one of the things I really used to drive me completely mental when I was starting is that we would go into a dungeon, the character would die, and then I would have to wait until my friends decided to have a break, come out, go back to the tavern, which is where most adventures used to start, and then recruit somebody else. So I would start like that for
It's not explicitly in the book, but my advice is always just like roll up another character in 30 seconds, because that's all it takes. And they're either in the next room or they stumble across you as a dweller within the dungeon already. So just get back in the game. Like that's what it's there for.
Last but not least, one thing that I wanted to mention, and is that you have a map. Me as a aficionado cartographer, it's not a zenithal map. It's not a top-down map. It's a cut section, which we don't see enough of. Why did you decide to go with that style?
And this goes back to my original playing time and the feeling I wanted to craft in this game, which was when I started making Dungeons and Dragons maps, it was more like the game like Pitfall, or Mario Brothers, where you're like scrolling along and that kind of thing. And so for me, that's the way I design. I didn't even know any better. That's the kind of maps I designed as a kid. And sometimes, and going back to the whole idea of children illustrations, one of the things that I love about children illustrations, and even like the childlike thing, is like, who cares about perspective? Who cares about like, is it accurately? Is it anatomically correct? Is it like, no, just like make it kind of fun. And I love the cutaway dungeons, and the random dungeon generator, like, is basically, you could make a dungeon in like, a few minutes.
Yeah.
In no time, and you could stock the dungeon, so to speak, if you want to call it that. And you can make that, and there's a dungeon sheet that basically starts you at the entrance, and then it just like make the dungeon. And there's like, traps, there's just random objects, every room's got something to play with. I've been coining the term enrichment, because zookeepers, I've told this story before. So if like the elephants are in the zoo, which is, sad, they're big animals in a small confined space, and the zookeepers go, well, we need to stimulate them somehow. So they'll throw a beach ball in there. and the elephants play with the beach ball, and they call it enrichment. And that's the way I look at almost everything within a dungeon is you go in there and what can they poke? What can they prod? There's always something to kind of get them excited. And so every dungeon room has something. It might be kind of minor, but there's something in there for you to poke and prod.
What happens now to FÄNG? What's the next step for you?
Well, I thought I might do the next zine quest, perhaps. But one of the things is, like I said, I kind of got caught off guard with the success of FÄNG. And so it'll put me a little bit on my back heels as far as like, I knew kind of what I wanted to do, but I really had to kind of like hone in on it. And that did take some extra time. And for those that haven't run a Kickstarter before, it's a lot of pressure because, you've committed to doing something. You don't want to let people down. Like, I want to have a good reputation within the gaming world, and I don't, so I was putting, and I put more pressure on myself than probably anybody could. That's just my nature. And so with that said, I was like, I don't want that situation to happen in game. So for me, the next time I do the Doomsayer guide and Doomsayer screen, perhaps with that, is I just want it like ready to go to the print and just done. And you're going to get it within like a month and a half or 2 months type of thing, because it's not fun to have that kind of pressure. And I've kind of like have now a proof of concept for people to see. And like, I've built up, I hope, the credibility for them to go, yeah, I just want more of that. And then on top of all of that, I'm in Canada, and here we are right before Trump's inauguration, and he's threatening Canada with 25% tariffs if for any product out of Canada. And I was able to make it all work when it was coming out of Canada, but probably over half of my audience is in the US, and that backed it. And then so adding 25% and all the administration fees that might come with that, it's just unknown at this point. So I'm gonna let the dust settle. I'm gonna do the work in the behind the scenes, and at this point I'm just happy if I can get the game out there to as many people as I can, but knowing that the Doomsayer guide is coming, as well as Bugbusters. I haven't quit working on Bugbusters, and I'm really happy with that game too.
What is the thing that makes you happiest about doing all these projects?
I think it's because I get to combine all my interests and skills all into one thing. It's I do like doing art, and the process of at least the style of art that I can do, which I purposely almost chose it because I can do it. And I also like the being able to have like the vision for a product and being able to execute it all by myself. I don't want to sound like a control freak or anything like that, but there's something about a singular vision for like, this is the product that I'm envisioning. I'm not really reliant upon other things kind of coming into the mix of it. And so I really kind of enjoy the fact that this is like truly the game that I wanted to make. Everything from the rules to the illustration to the layout to, and I really admire like an auteur person, like say like Luca Reyes, that like they have their vision for what they're trying to make, and it's like just everything Luca. And I really like that. And same with like Andrew Kolb is another one where he's like making a game and it's all him. And it's like that. I think in theater or Hollywood, they call it the triple threat, where you can do kind of everything. So I really like the fact that I've been able to take a lot of my skills, and even with the marketing, we did like I promised a Christmas holiday adventure called the King Kringle, where the Pumpkin Prince kidnaps him. And I mean, it's not that I had time at Christmas, but I was like, I'm going to make an animation where King Kringle's in a cage over boiling lava and being lowered down by the Pumpkin Prince. And it's fun to do. Like, I mean, I enjoy what I do so much. I do film work, and I do like corporate videos, and I do like, communications and marketing and all that stuff. But this is truly all my passions coming together in one space. And I mean, I just love it. I'll keep doing it until even if people don't want it anymore, I'm going to keep doing it.
I love that drive, because I know so many people who get very disenchanted when they don't have the success that they envisioned that they wanted to have. How do you keep up that drive? It's not an easy thing to do sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe circling back to where we started with your podcast and my podcast, like I know the kind of podcast I like and the kind of podcast I want to put on, but then you see podcasts that are getting hundreds of thousands of followers and thousands and thousands of views, and it's clickbaity and all that kind of stuff. And I know that's kind of going around in the circles of D&D YouTube right now. And to me, it wouldn't be authentic of myself, and I know the algorithm and I know how to beat it, and I just do not want to be that. Like to me, it's Gabriel Quiroga, who made Hell Knight.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if we talked about it when I interviewed him or not, but it was maybe even it was before we started interviewing. We were talking about this kind of same thing as him. Like he should be far more popular than he is, and there's a few other designers like that should be far more popular, but they just can't break through. And he said, well, it's kind of like a punk band. And if you go to a punk concert, basically there's like the audience is full of other punk bands and their families. That's kind of the way it is. And then finally, once in a while, one of the punk bands kind of breaks free and they become like the Nirvana of the world. But ultimately, all those shows that were happening in the Seattle grunge scene were like the only people really attending them were other punk bands. And so I want, if anything, I would love to consider like, your space, my space, there for the indie creators and the punks of the world. And hopefully we can foster an environment and make it big enough for them to succeed. And I totally get why there's people that get down, they design something and they go, I want to share this with the world. But the way the world works is it's very hard to break through that wall. And that was partly why I started my channel, was to allow folks a platform to share their games. But with that said, like nobody watches my channel either. So it's like a little bit of what I can do.
Well, to be honest, I think as a LGBTQI rights activist, one of my mottos, which is one of the things that keeps me going to do it, is that there is no small activism. Any kind of activism is good, because even if just one people hears what you have to say and they change their minds or they change their ways, it worked, and that should be good enough. And I agree with you with the terms of the algorithm. And I mean, don't get me wrong. When I started, and I started in 2011, it was a completely different kettle of fish. Very, very, very different. And then I had to stop when I came to Spain, and then came back, and the whole scenario had completely changed. And one of the reasons I don't give a monkeys if I have 10 views or 100 million views is that to get to that point of 100 million views, I would have to spend so long fighting the algorithm that all my energy would dissipate just doing that. And not just that, but also for a system that it changes as it wants without considering the consequences for people who've been working so hard, and suddenly you just disappear. Even if you haven't done anything wrong, you just disappear. And I just think, what's the point?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be doing this if I had to be thinking like that all the time. So I just do what I want when I want, and if that's good enough for people, great. And if it isn't, I'm having a great time doing it. So that's it. Do you think that will ever change? The system itself will ever change so people like us can get the exposure, not the success, but the exposure that all the people who just fight the algorithm get? Or do you think that this is going to be like that forever as a professional?
As a professional, like ultimately, like what it boils down to is eyeballs, right? They want eyeballs on their product so that they can advertise on it, and that's so they're after their money making. The only thing, and I'm hopeful of it, is that there's a real shift in the way people think, and that's different than what the algorithm kind of projects out to them. Like, I mean, TikTok right now, and who knows if it's going to continue. I suspect it probably will. They'll figure out some sort of solution. But that kind of short form content, like the quick dopamine hits, those are okay. And I know, like anything, like you can eat enough jelly beans that like it'll fill you up. But sometimes you want like a nice full meal. And I find like people are really craving substance. And so my hope is that in the future, like in my game is designed like for real life, like gathering around the table and like to like laugh and enjoy it. And it's like purposely designed that way, but it's an antithesis of the way games are now, where most people play online. So I guess my hope is that more and more people, like I think being together in real life is going to become more of a thing again, where people go, I want that connectivity. I want that joy of seeing their faces. I want the joy of laughing together. And same with the long form content. I think people are going to be craving the nourishment that comes from real in-depth conversations that have meaning. And algorithm be damned that I think the people will go, that's what I want. And then therefore they'll get the eyeballs in order to sell the advertising for these platforms.
Fingers crossed indeed. Before we go, where can people get FÄNG and Blockbusters and everything?
Sure. Just go to DiekuGames.com. There's all the different games are kind of on there. My handle is Dieku Games at all the different platforms. I'm not that active on socials, just based upon what we just talked about. I do find like since the algorithms really kicked in, like it's, you could post something that used to get 50 likes or like at least things like that, and now it's down to 2, and they're just kind of killing their golden goose, because as soon as people quit posting on it, eventually like nobody's going to be on it because people aren't posting. But with that said, like I started a subreddit for FÄNG. Also the system itself, I've been kind of coining it called Doom 6 because it's got the Doom stack and the Doom 6. And my hope is to have a third-party adventure license so that anybody can make a game for FÄNG, like an adventure for FÄNG. And then if you're interested in the Doom 6 system, my hope is, it's time-consuming, is to get like a kind of like a SRD for people to understand, like, here's how the mechanics work and why they work, and all the little side notes of like, you can try this, you can try that, because there's been lots of variations or thoughts in my head of like alternatives to little things that, and hopefully it becomes a nice ecosystem for people to make their own games if they like it, and maybe we'll get lots of people in real life rolling dice and making Doom stacks.
That would be amazing. Garry, thank you so much for being with me today. It's been an absolute delight having you around, and I really, really mean it. And I hope that this is not the last time that we get to chat about anything. Really. So,
well, I hope I can do the return the favor and have you on, because I would love to, if people are not following your channel or podcast, I'd love to get you on the show and talk about your journey and talk about your podcast and like, and also your philosophy on game design. I love it when you and Chris talk about the industry. I love it when you hone in on that kind of stuff, and all your reviews are incredible. So hopefully we can get you on my channel too.
I would love to, absolutely, anytime you like. So yeah, count on me for that one. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.